All right, hey everyone. It's a little weird to be giving a talk that's just entirely about myself. Normally I give talks about really dorky things like JavaScript or Backbone or something. But hopefully I can make it entertaining, and I have a lot of embarrassing photos from my childhood, and hopefully there's some parts that maybe you guys will relate to, depending on exactly how geeky you grew up. So let's start off where, way back where it all began. Of course, it started with a love story at Caltech, one of the nerdiest institutions in America, and that's where my parents met. So here's my dad. He's posing next to a supercomputer. This is whack. So this is what computers looked like back when my dad was getting started, and this is the Caltech Cosmic Cube. And so he's quite into computers. He actually did physics originally. A lot of computer people come from physics because they were doing like all this physics stuff, and they were trying to do all these calculations, and they're like, wow, it is really boring to do all these calculations by hand. I know, let's go make supercomputers to do our calculations for us. So basically they were lazy, and I'm like, all right, we'll just make supercomputers instead. So he was teaching and researching at Caltech. And then my mom was taking his classes. And she kind of took after him. She did physics, more in the astronomy thing. She worked at JPL. She worked on something called a scatterometer, which is currently orbiting the Earth, which is a little creepy because she is one of those moms that emails every day and reads my tweets even though she's not on Twitter. And she now has something that's orbiting space. So I don't know what she coded in that, but let's hope it's not too creepy. So they were together. They were a very productive couple. I looked them up on DBLP, which is where you can look up everyone to find their papers. I went on a date the other night, and I looked up my date on DBLP papers. And I remember to check Facebook. So here's some of the papers, and I've correlated them with when my siblings were born and when I was born. So you can see that, in fact, the dorkiest papers happened right around the year I was born, which means that I guess that they really got really excited by these papers. I can't even pronounce these papers, right? Dio to Enye, maybe Enye, I don't know. So they kept having babies, doing really dorky papers. So that kind of set the stage for us to have a fairly atypical childhood. So when I was a kid, this is me posing in our computer room. I called it my computer room because I just basically thought it was mine, but theoretically it was a shared computer room. I would just give my brother porn so he would go away, and I could stay in my computer room. I got in trouble with some authorities for that. So you see in our room, like, this is a computer science. This is obviously Albert Einstein. So around the house, we didn't have like pictures of my parents on their wedding day. We had pictures of Richard Feynman. When you first walked into our lobby, there was this giant painting of Richard Feynman with this famous kind of lightning symbol that he's known for. And for years, I actually thought he was a Japanese philosopher. And it was I didn't find out till much later that was Richard Feynman, and that's what we greeted everybody with when they came in. We also had, instead of framed degrees, we had framed supercomputer chips on our walls. And I kind of thought this was normal, right? It's obviously what everybody has to inspire them around the house. We also had, of course, a lot of computers. I think we had something like our computer to TV ratio was like 6-1, and our TV was like really pathetic. Like our TV was like a 13-inch TV, right? And our computers are like these 21-inch monitors that my dad has gotten by blackmailing IBM. And so other people would come over from our neighborhood, and they'd look at our TV and they'd be really confused because they're like, no, you're not supposed to be in this neighborhood and have this tiny TV. It's like, well, we have priorities, and our priorities are in the computer room. But it's cool because for a while you could actually watch TV on your computer, and now I know you guys can all do that now, but that was actually a thing that you could do a long time ago. There was something called the STB TV tuner, I think, and you could watch TV. Like, I was watching TV on my computer when I was like 10 years old or something. But then these things, now we're finally at the stage where these things have come back and they're actually ubiquitous, and so everybody can do them. But computers could do a lot even way back then. So, of course, we had a Windows machine, a Mac machine, laptop. This is our TV. See, my laptop has a little award on it. I would participate in competitions around computers. There was this competition in, did anyone do Science Olympiad? Okay, yeah, so Science Olympiad, there's lots of things where you're supposed to use your hands, like the Rube Goldberg experiment, the egg drop, the rocket launch. I managed to find the internet searching competition, and your goal was actually, like, they would say, all right, you need to find the answer to this question on the internet. I was like, all right, I got this. I actually did not get it at all. It was really hard. Like, I swear I still today, I consider myself one of the best Googlers around, like someone who Googles. But that was hard. I don't know who got that. But yeah, we also had very fast internet. We had a T1 line. And it was because my dad worked for the university, and it was a direct connection to the university's T1. So that meant that I had a lot more friends when I was a kid, because I was like, hey, guess what? I have a T1 line. You want to come over and look at Backstreet Boys sites? Which worked. And that was kind of awesome, right? Because before that, I was just bribing people by giving them candy. But, you know, it got kind of tiring to put together these little candy bags for, like, all 200 people in the class. So I could just tell them, like, hey, I have a T1 line, come over, and you know, we can pretend to be friends based on my technological capabilities. But it meant that I had access to the internet, right? And I didn't have to, you know, put up with the slow experience that a lot of people probably did. But at first, I wasn't using the internet too much. I was more using, like, really awesome graphics programs. So, of course, we have KidPix. Everyone... Oh, come on, a little shout out. Yeah. Do you remember that these paintbrushes, they made sounds? Paintbrushes that made sounds. Like, I haven't seen anyone come back up with, like, so the bubbly one would go, and then this one was the fire one would go, it was like, just the most amazing thing, right? The creativity of KidPix was fantastic. There was also Print Shop Deluxe. So I would use that to print out menus for our meals every night. Like, you were formally invited to dinner at our house with our family and no one else, and we're going to eat the same thing that we eat every day because I only know how to make one thing. I was thinking. And then, of course, there are games like Carmen Sandiego, right? And I did eventually remake Carmen Sandiego using web technologies at a hackathon, so that's like a lifetime goal checked off. But then what happened was, so we lived kind of out in the boonies, and we weren't very close to anything, and so if I wanted to get anywhere, I had to walk like 2 hours, and I had to walk 2 hours past a high security penitentiary. So I didn't do a lot of walking past that penitentiary. So it meant, so there was this one Mother's Day where I was like, oh shoot, I didn't get my mom a present, and maybe she would actually appreciate some appreciation. So I was like, oh, I know, I have the internet, I can just Google how to make a present, right? So Yahooed, sorry, it was Yahooing at the time. So I Yahooed how to make a web page, right? Because I'd seen all these web pages. I was like, well, that's something I could do. That would be, you know, showing the thought counts and all that stuff. And so I found out that back then, one of the ways to make a web page was to use Microsoft Word and to use a plugin called the Internet Explorer Assistant. And so you would make your amazing web page in Word with word art and everything amazing, and then you would have that plugin and you could save it as an HTML, right? So that was the very first web page I made, and since then I've never had to buy anyone a present ever, and that's really what got me interested in websites, because the thing that I saw about that was like, oh, this is so cool, I can make this website and then I could put it online, and so like my mom could show everybody how cool the card was that I got for her, right? So I just thought that was so cool, the fact that not only could I make stuff, but I could share it. And then I learned, like, oh, I could get input from people and I could make it interactive. So as soon as I started getting into web programming, my dad kind of latched on and was like, okay, all right, here's all the other stuff you can do. So I learned about Perl. So Perl was kind of my first real language, if you consider it such. And Mad Libs was one of the first programs I wrote. And we actually wrote it on New Year's one year, so instead of watching the ball drop, we were sitting there watching my Perl script run. And we finally got it working right as it struck midnight. I was like, yes! That was quite a bonding moment for me and my dad. But Mad Libs was awesome because I put out this Mad Libs, and back then, there weren't that many Mad Libs on the internet. that was back when there weren't even that many people on the internet. So I actually got like thousands of people entering my Mad Libs. I was like, wow, this is so cool. I can put something out there and then people give me user input and it's like user generated content. And I just thought that was amazing. Because before then, like I'd always had fun doing like school projects, and you go and you make your volcano and you bring it in. You're like, oh, look how cool this volcano is, and then you like explode it a million times for the guy you have a crush on. But you couldn't share it on the internet, right? So there's only a maximum number of like 20 people you could share your creation with. But when you make something online, there's this like infinite number of people you can share it with. So I thought that was awesome. So I just basically started putting everything online. Anything I did. Any photo I take, anything I wanted to write, you know, blogs, all that stuff, I just put it all online because it's like you never know, right? You never know if somebody will find it, what somebody will contribute to it, and I just wanted to document everything. Now, my dad back then was really into Java, and he actually thought Java was the future of the web because back then that's when Java applets were really cool. And he invested heavily in Java. He actually took all of my college funds and he put it in the Sun stock, which didn't work out very well for my college funds. But that's how I learned about stock, because I was able to watch the graph like split and then go like that and then keep going like that and it kind of converge to zero. But yeah, so he was really into Java. So he even actually ran this thing called the Saturday Java Academy. And we would learn Java on the weekends at the university, and I would get all my friends to come, and that's actually where I first got asked out with a Java applet. It was really, really cute. It was my favorite movie is Puff the Magic Dragon, and it was like Puff going, "Oh, Pamela, I really think you should go out with this guy. Will you say yes?" And even though he was gay, I said yes because it was a Java applet. So. I wasn't his last girlfriend. So he was really into Java, and he really wanted me to be really into Java too, because he thought Java was the future, and he wanted to make sure I was, you know, programming Java and making lots of Java applets, and I was, because it was fun. You could do some really cool stuff with it. It was like, you know, Flash, or Flash was cool. But sometimes my dad got a little too insistent on the Java, and he'd be like, I don't think you should go out this weekend. You haven't programmed any Java this week. And I was like, oh, don't worry, Dad. I totally programmed Java. Just give me the money. But he really felt like, I think he felt that I was playing around too much. I was doing too many other things, and that I wasn't focusing enough on what he thought was key to my success. This is like 9th grade or something. So I kind of had a few other priorities, right? So I was involved in student government, arts and crafts, you know, volcanoes. I made a lot of volcanoes in my life. There's so many boys to impress. Volunteering, clubs, the newspaper. I was interested in like a lot of stuff, right? And I was like, okay, Dad, it's cool. I'll program Java sometimes, but I have some other interests I'd like to attend to as well. I've always had a pretty hard time just doing one thing, because I think there's a lot of different parts of the brain, and you need to exercise all of them. And programming Java, I wasn't able to exercise all of them, I guess. But now we get to an actual point of life where you're supposed to make a decision, right? And you're not supposed to be playing around. And that's, you know, junior year when you have to pick a college. And that also means in order to pick a college, you have to kind of figure out what you want to do in life and figure out like the whole rest of your life. So there's a lot of things you have to decide around that point. So I was like, okay, all right, so what is it that I like doing? So I kind of listed all my favorite things. I was like, oh, I like doing events, I like doing graphic design, I like learning languages, I like programming, I like making newspapers. But I realized that kind of everything I did, I used computers for to make it better, right? When I would plan an event, I would have a website for it. When I did student government, I had a website, a student directory, all that stuff. So I just always had computers with me for everything. And I realized that computer science would actually be a really good base for anything I'd want to do, because, you know, you take programming and you can combine it with so many things, and that's what I think is really cool about programming. And you know, computer science is a fairly legit degree as well, and my dad was a fan of this. So I had to decide where. So I was looking at, you know, the Ivies, but then a lot of them are really cold and on the East Coast. So I kind of like warm things. So So I discovered this university called USC, and I just happened to get a postcard from them one day. I had never heard of them before because I do not do this football thing. I also don't do any of the sports that are happening in this city either. But I discovered USC, and I was like, oh, USC looks cool. And the reason why I really liked USC was because USC has a lot of different departments in it, and a lot of like different really good departments. So they have this School of Engineering, which is pretty good. It's not #1 in computer science, but it's pretty good. They also have, Humanities College. They have this School of Cinema, which is like one of the best schools, and they have all these professors that come in from Hollywood. Like I took a class in animation there, and our professor was one of the guys who was one of the Disney animators, and so he went through every single like Disney like urban legend and told us which of them were true and false. So like the preacher from Little Mermaid on the boat, and they say like, oh, his boner is sticking out or something, and he actually drew it on the board. He's like, no, it's clearly his knee. Look, it's his knee. But then some of them were actually sexual references. But I'll let you guess which ones. So stuff like that was awesome. I was like, okay, I can go to USC, and I can do computer science, but I can still do more of that other stuff I like to do. That sounds like pretty good. And surprisingly, my dad actually liked USC too, because USC would let you do undergraduate research from the first week you entered. And undergraduate research in computer science or any engineering degree is considered a pretty good thing and a nice experience. So he was behind the decision, even though he may not have known my secret plan to do lots of other things on the side. So in those 4 years, I did computer science. I did a 3D animation degree, which mostly involved in me animating boba, because I really liked boba at the time. So I would go into the local boba shops, and I would just sit there taking photos of everything and like sketching. Eventually, they kicked me out. But that was fun. I did a linguistics minor as well because I think language is awesome. It was really cool. I took the intro to linguistics syntax at the same time as taking our compilers class. So I was doing parse trees in both classes, but in one class it'd be like parse trees of a language, and in the other class it would be parse trees of like a programming language versus the English language. And it actually made it all make better sense to me. Like I think I did much better in that class because of being in those two at the same time. So linguistics is fascinating. And I also worked in the games program, even though I'm really, really bad at playing games and anything like that. So I made all the students put Pamela modes into the games so that I could actually win at something. So that was pretty fun. And I also did a lot of web along the way, right? 'Cause I always had to make websites for stuff, so we had this online magazine, and I had this summer where I really discovered web APIs, and I got really, really into that. One of the funnest games I made was actually not up here, but called the Profane game. And this object, I discovered this API for profanity, which you'd give it a word or a sentence, and it would tell you if there were profane words in it. So I was like, oh, how can I use this? So I made a game where the goal is to type in as many words as you can in 60 seconds that are profane. And people seem to really enjoy this. Like, I think people had a lot of stress. This was back when Dig was big, and so this is the one time I actually got dug up, and so this thing got it was on Lifehacker, it got dug, and then I got like 25,000 hits that day, and we look at the Dig thread, and everyone's like comparing their list of bad words. And then eventually somebody figured out it was really easy to hack the high score script, because I had no protections, you just entered a URL. And people also posted JavaScript snippets for automatically sending bad words. And someone's like, I really should be sleeping with my wife right now, but this is too fun. So that was one of my funnest little mashups that I made. And the profanity API, I was worried they were going to hate me because I'm like, wow, I just hit their servers hard and not for what they wanted. But they loved it because they got so much data. Because they had like their database of profane words, but once Dig entered, it's like imagine Reddit, right? Their thing expanded. So I now have a profanity API filter for life. Don't know what I'm going to use it for yet. So remember before my dad was kind of upset that I was not programming all the time. But one day he did actually visit me in college, and he saw that I was doing other stuff too. And he took me aside and he said, actually, maybe it's not so bad to do stuff other than just straight programming all the time. I was like, yes! Finally, got my dad's approval. So that was good. That was something that had been bothering me for a while. He's mostly still just doing programming. So we get to another decision point, right? Summer after senior year, I even did a master's, and I needed to find a job. I could have done research, but after doing research for 4 years as an undergraduate, I kind of thought that research moved a bit slow. And I saw the industry, especially the web industry, and the web industry seemed to be moving so fast, right? You guys know how fast we move, almost too fast. But I decided that I'd rather do a job. But I wasn't really sure in what, because I hadn't really spent the last 4 years preparing for a job. I'd spent the last 4 years just doing what I like doing. So that was, I knew I liked programming, I knew I liked kind of visual things, and I knew I liked communication and planning and writing and that stuff. I was like, okay, so how do these all intersect, right? I didn't want to just get a software engineer position, right? I didn't want somebody just to tell me what to code all day. So I was looking into several positions, and of course on Craigslist. So I was thinking like, oh, maybe I should be a UX engineer or researcher. Maybe work something in games because there's a visual and a user component to that. Maybe a technical director, which is somebody at like games company that sits between the programmers and between the artists, which I thought was interesting because you could kind of mix both things. So I was looking into things that were kind of hybrid roles because I knew that everything I'd done so far was kind of hybridy. But I really was finding nothing. Like I applied tons of places and basically heard back from nobody at all. And I think that's just because I wasn't really a good fit for any of the roles I was looking for because I didn't know what I was looking for. But finally, eventually, I saw this advert for a role from Google. And it was there was two roles, actually. One of them was API support engineer, where your job was to help people understand how to use the APIs, which meant like writing blog posts and giving talks and doing sample demos. And then there was Maps API evangelist, where your job was like to go out there at the conferences and kind of be the public face. And I thought both of them looked really cool because I was like, oh, I could program and also do those other stuff I like doing. So I went to Google and I actually interviewed for both roles. And so all we did was that we just took the roles and we just mashed them together to make one title. So I was the Maps API support engineer. And I did that for quite a while, and I really liked it at first. I loved it. I could imagine doing nothing else. I was like, when I'm 50 years old, I'm going to be supporting the Maps API. I think some people I still get emails today, like with people with Maps API questions. I'm like, okay, that was like 3 years ago. Come on. One day I have to stop supporting it. But I really liked it, and it lasted. I was there for like 4.5 years, 5 years, and I went through lots of titles while I was there. But it was basically the same thing. It was this mix of programming, communicating, and making things, and doing a lot of learning and helping as well. And I was on Maps, and then I was on Wave, and I have my obligatory Wave shirt. And now, of course, Wave had this glorious year, and then it kind of died a horrible death. As illustrated here. I was really into Wave. Like, for somebody who spends a lot of time communicating, Wave actually solved a lot of problems for me. We don't have to go into details after of everything that was wrong with Wave. I know there were a lot of problems with it. However, I was really into it, and I was like, I poured my heart and soul into that project for that year I was on it. And then one day, we were in a meeting at Google, and we have this VC meeting, and so this little guy in the corner is like, hi, we're killing Wave. Don't worry, you can do other stuff. I was like, what? That's how you just killed the project we've been working on for the last, however many years? So I was like heartbroken, right? Like more so than I've ever been heartbroken by like a dude. Because I was like, wow, like you can just pour your everything into something, and then suddenly one day they can take it away. And I was like, shit, I can't work for somebody if I know that one day they'll just stop supporting whatever I'm working on, right? So I was really heartbroken after this, and I was like, okay, I tried to get interested in working on other Google projects, but every time I'd start working on something, I'd be like, wait a second, I'll work on it, and then they might just take it away from me one day. And I couldn't deal with that, so I quit. It took me 3 tries to quit, like over the course of like 4 months. It is really hard to quit someplace. But eventually, I quit. And so I was like, I was kind of over the company thing at the time, because it's like, oh, if I work for a company, they're going to control me, and then they're going to tell me when something is not to be worked on anymore, and they'll just kill everything I'm doing. So I decided that I would just go out in the world and just do my own thing and be a free-range developer, because there was lots of side projects I wanted to work on, right? Like some flashcards, this little game, and this nutrition tracking app, because I got really into food at the time, especially after 5 years at Google. So there were tons of apps I wanted to make, so I was like, I don't need another company to tell me what to do. There's apps I can make. I have some savings from Google. I don't want to rush into another company right now. It's like when you break up with somebody and you've been in a long relationship with them, you're not supposed to rush immediately into another relationship, right? You're supposed to go play the field. So I decided I'm going to go play the field by myself. So I was like, all right, I'll just be a free-range developer. This is where we enter my hand-drawn slides. But in order to do this, I had to figure out where to be, where I was going to hack. So at first I was like, oh, I know, I'll just hack from home. Because, at home you've got all these benefits. You've got these little cute cats that you can pet. You've got home-cooked meals. You don't have to worry about the commute and getting run over by every crazy thing in San Francisco. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't really work out like this in practice, right? So you're at home, so your cats decide that the best place to nap is always on your keyboard, right? Which really sucks if you use a loosely typed language like JavaScript or Python, because as soon as they do anything, your whole program breaks. And then you've got your kitchen, which is distracting you, and you're like, oh, I'm just gonna put something in the slow cooker, and then maybe some refrigerator, and then you've got timers going off every 10 minutes. And then, you're trying to bang on this problem in your code, and you're like, oh, I could just walk over to my living room and watch Glee instead. And then it turns out that thanks to Hulu and Netflix, you can watch 10 seasons of Glee without ever stopping. So that didn't work out so well, right? So I was like, all right, I need a new plan. So I was like, oh, okay, I know, I'll do what everybody does. I'll work at cafes. I could just drink this bottomless cup of tea, and I could eavesdrop on hipster hackers, and I could listen to what startup they were planning, and then I can just code the startup while they're planning it, and then park all the domain names and then charge them for it. You can actually do that. And so I was like, oh, this would be amazing. I'll do cafes. However, they also don't work out in practice. Most cafes weren't actually designed for hackers to sit at them and hack all day. So first of all, they don't have many outlets. So these are actual, if any of you guys are thinking of doing it, these are actual maps of cafes in San Francisco with the location of the outlets. As you can see, there are not very many outlets, right? There's 3 in each of them. And then of course you have to plot them next to the proximity to the bathroom as well. So they're not designed for hacking at all. And also people give you these weird looks. And then other people can take your spots really easily because you don't have this reserved spot, right? So there's one Starbucks on Howard and Beale or something like that, and I really liked it because it had a good amount of outlets and comfy chairs. But I was always competing with the local homeless people, so I had to get there really early because if the homeless people got there first, they would just sleep there all day because they don't have anywhere else that they need to be going. So it was really normally if you're competing with normal people, eventually they leave, but when you're competing with homeless people, they don't leave. So I'd have to get there really early, or then I'd get there too late, and I'd kind of just sit there eyeing the homeless person all day. And that wasn't very fun. The only good thing about that is that Starbucks did actually give me free teas all the time, because I think they thought I classed up the joint. I was like, wow, I'm the classiest person in this joint. The other problem is the bathrooms, right? So you get situated at a cafe, you finally got the outlet, you're on the Wi-Fi, you're doing some mobile hybrid app hacking, so you've got your Android and your iPhone connected, and then you realize you just really need to go to the bathroom, right? And you're thinking to yourself, no, I'm just gonna debug this, and you start eyeing the bathroom. You're like, oh god, that bathroom, it looks so amazing. No, I'm just gonna deploy one more time, and then eventually you just give up, right? And you have to unpack it, pack everything back in your backpack, and run to the bathroom, and then you just don't have the effort to put everything back together again, right? So I think that the bathroom was actually the thing that killed it for me, right? If I could just freely go to the bathroom and whatever, maybe I would have stayed at cafes and gone with it. But that was just the last straw, right? And it is actually medically bad for women to be holding it, right? Because you can actually get uterine cancer or whatever So you should not do it. It's bad for you. You could do like the whole make friends with people and ask them to watch your stuff, but nah, I'm not really into the making friends with people. So I was like, okay, all right, the next thing up, co-working space. I will have to spend a little bit more money. However, I will have bathrooms. I will have some level of trust in people so I can leave my stuff while going to the bathroom. I'll have free tea all the time. I'll have Wi-Fi and outlets galore. And I'll even have people to talk to, right? The homeless people weren't that chatty. Starbucks people were actually really happy. The Starbucks waiters are incredibly happy. I think they must have really good benefits. So I went to a co-working space. It was actually very near here, just like 2nd Street. And there were a lot of really interesting people at this co-working space. People were not just programmers, right? You think, oh, so everyone's a programmer. Not everyone's a programmer. So there was one person who was a sex book author, but it was for people over 50, so not super relevant to me. There was a geologist who would like study holes in the ground all day. There was multiple life coaches, which is a profession that I did not even know existed, but they were always like life coaching each other and stuff. There was also a Wikipedia ghostwriter. So I didn't know this, but many Wikipedia articles about people and companies are actually written by ghostwriters because they want them to look good. And this guy was just really good at writing Wikipedia articles and would get contracted out by like startups and companies and people in the Bay Area. So they all had very interesting stories, but I also didn't have that much in common with them because I'm not a geologist over 50. So I could only have kind of limited conversations, not everyday ones, and what I really wanted to have conversations was about like hacking, right? Like I found this problem in Python or JavaScript and I wanted to rant about it, right? And nobody in the space was actually working in the kind of same frameworks as me. So whenever I wanted to rant, I would just turn to Twitter instead. So Twitter became my little co-working community for the year. And I was like, man, y'all you people on Twitter should just come make a co-working space together. It'd be so cool. Although maybe that wouldn't work. Just like thousands. But I was like, you know what? All right, I need to find a way to get to know these people because I'm around them all the time. And I was like, okay, well, how do people get to know each other when they're adults and they have nothing to talk about? Well, obviously alcohol, right? So the co-working space would often have alcohol-infused events with kegs and wine and all that stuff. And everyone would get all chatty and da-da-da. But I kind of hated these as well. Because first of all, they were always at 4 p.m., which is like my productivity peak, where I'm like, yeah, all right, I finally got it. I'm going to deploy now. So I don't want to be like interrupted during that peak. But then also, remember the time I was working on a nutrition app, and I just thought it would be slightly inappropriate to take breaks to like binge drink. So I had to like stand my ground. So there are actually, this drawing here is based on an actual photo that was taken in the space where everybody's laughing and I'm in the corner going. So I didn't quite take advantage of the way you're supposed to socialize. So eventually I realized that basically I was surrounded by strangers, people that I didn't know or I didn't particularly want to know. And I was like, wow, all right, it's been a year here. I don't know anyone. And it made me feel more alone than when I was like at home or at a cafe. Because at least at home or at a cafe, you have an excuse for feeling alone. Because, there's no one there and you're not supposed to know anyone. But in a co-working space, it's supposed to be a community. And anytime I'm at a place where it's supposed to be a community, but I feel alone, then that just feels worse, right? So I was like, okay, all right, I'm kind of really sad and lonely. And I couldn't even hang around people that had colleagues because I would get jealous of them. So I was like, no, I'm too jealous. I'm not going to be around you. So I realized what was important to me. First of all, I really need to be able to pee, whatever. But second of all, I really needed people around me, and not just any people, but people that are actually working on the same project as me, and people that are like driven by the same motivation and passions as me. So I was like, all right, so I can't really find that at cafes or co-working spaces. The place where I'd find that would be at a company, on a team, where we're all working towards the same goal. So I started thinking, all right, maybe I've had my year of playing around and sowing my programming seeds. Maybe it's time for me to find a company. But I wanted to, go slowly into the decision and really try and figure out what it was that I wanted to do. So this time, I had a year off, and I could look back and reflect and figure out, all right, out of everything I've done, the last many years of my life, what are the things that I like to do? And this time, I actually came up with a much better breakdown of what it is I like to do. And it's basically, I like to make things, I like to learn things, and then I like to teach what I've learned while making things, right? And any combination of things, right? I love creating things that teach people or creating things that help me learn and all of that. So I was like, all right, so I'm basically looking for something where I could teach people or where I'm helping making tools for people to learn. So that kind of narrowed my search down a bit, right? I knew I didn't want to work on ads or coupons or something like that. But there's still kind of a couple options, right? So I could go back to being developer advocate, because a developer advocate, you're helping people learn how to use something. And maybe I was considering, maybe if I could be a developer advocate at Mozilla, I could help people just learn web development. That would be cool. They didn't have a space available then, though. I could work at Khan Academy and be an exercise designer, which is an actual role they have. Or work in instructional ops and help instruct other people how to use a platform. I could do training. There's lots of training things around here. Or maybe I could even be an engineer, right? I had spent the last year basically doing mostly coding every day, and I liked it because I was working on something that I was really into. And I was like, if I was working on a product that I was really into and it was a pretty small team and I felt like there was a pretty good chance that they weren't going to kill it, I could maybe really like being an engineer. So I started to toy with that idea. So I started checking out all these options, and then I went to this food camp conference, and there was a lot of people there from lots of these different startups, and I met the co-founder of Coursera, and I met him because I was just going to every single education session, because food camp is an unconference, so you come up with sessions and you go to whatever sessions you want, and I was just at every education session, and he's like, why are you at every education session? What do you do? I was like, I don't know, I just think it's cool. He's like, okay, well, you should come meet the team. So I met the team, and then 2 days later, I signed the contract, because I guess I'm really easy to convince, and I'm bad at saying no. But I thought it was a pretty cool team, and it's really cool that we're working on. And so I basically joined as what you call a front-end engineer, or a full-stack engineer, or web app engineer, or product engineer. We basically change our titles every week, because that's what you can do. But it's cool. We work on the things that people see. So, the course catalog, or the dashboard, or the lecture player, or the discussion forums, all these things that people actually interact with and use. And I get to actually make them and put some thought into what would make them a good experience. And it's really, really interesting because you have to learn about people, not just programming. So when I read books about motivation and behavior and experience, I can actually use what I've learned in those books and apply them towards making a product. So it is actually, even though it is engineering, it's in engineering where, because we're so small, we can actually have this creativity as well, and that's always been really important. But I don't just get to engineer, I can also do other things, right? So I can also help contribute to the company culture. What I've realized actually is that when you're at a startup, it's not just about building the product, it's also really about building the company. Because what you do in that first year is going to kind of dictate how it's going to be, 5 years from now. So we're trying to create a company that shares a lot with show and tell and has fun with games nights, and it's open with open sourcing. So I find that really interesting as well, to try and contribute to this company culture and set the stage for it. I can also host events that relate to it. So we had a whole line of study groups last year with Python group. And I can write blog posts and speak at conferences about the stuff I've learned there. So even though I'm just an engineer, there's actually a lot you can do as an engineer, especially at a smaller company like this. But I still have the desire to teach, so I don't really get to teach a lot as an engineer. I mean, I get to do some internal trainings, and I try and do as many of those as I can, but there's only so many people to train, and I'm kind of done now. But I still have this craving to teach, so that's where Girl Development comes in. So I have to admit, it is a very noble organization, but I also just started doing it because I just wanted to get out my teaching urges. So kind of selfish, but I'm sure lots of noble things start with selfish desires, so that's cool. So with Girl Development, it's sweet because we teach all these low-cost web development classes. So anything that I think would be really useful for other people to learn, I can put together a curriculum for it and teach them. So it's like HTML and JavaScript and APIs and backend and databases and all that stuff. And at the same time as teaching, I also get to meet a lot of local people, like, and especially get to meet women. Because I don't usually meet women in my job as an engineer. So this is also my excuse to get female friends. If I didn't do this, I probably would not know any. And it's good practice for interacting with females, because I'm also not that used to it. Kind of didn't grow up with that. So it's pretty cool because I realized that, part of girl development is teaching, but also a lot of it is also the people, right? And I really like everyone that's I've met so far through it. So kind of throughout everything, I've realized that a lot of times it has to do with people. As much as I like to be like, oh, it's cool, I can be a hermit and I'm going to just program stuff I like all day. But a lot of it comes down to who are you actually doing it with, and do you actually enjoy them, and are you working, do you all have similar passions and motivations? And it makes everything so much better when you're actually working with people. So that's where I am right now. I like to think that I'm still pretty young, hopefully. So I think there's a lot more that can happen. I'm thinking maybe the good plan is to completely switch professions every 4 years. And I don't know what the next one will be, but it's all been a really fun experience to learn so far. So thanks.
Questions for like 10 minutes, please. Yeah.
I can answer JavaScript questions too.
So are you considering opening your own startup, teaching tools that's related? There's so many Code Academy and Coursera.
Yeah, I mean because I did contemplate actually turning one of the that nutrition app almost did become a startup. I had a co-founder for a while, for 2 months, but then it didn't work out, and I realized in retrospect that I'm glad it didn't work out. We were at the stage before we signed all the papers and all that stuff, and that's when I realized that it is a massive commitment to go in on a startup with someone. So if I was going to do that again, I would want to do it with someone, because I realize it's really hard to be doing anything by yourself. So I'd want to do something with someone, but it would have to be somebody that I felt really, really confident about doing. Because basically when you're going on a startup, it's a bigger commitment than a relationship, right? And you're supposed to be in it for at least a couple years. So I haven't found, that particular thing I would do, or that particular person I would do it with, but that could be the thing to do in 4 years. Anything else?
Oh, I have a question.
Yeah.
What was it like when Google Wave first came out and everybody wanted an invite? And then it goes out, I'm sorry if this is a hard question, but it goes, I wanted an invite, and I got an invite, but it went up and then it went down. What was it like being on that team?
So Wave opened too early. We had this whiteboard which said how many simultaneous users we could support, and I remember when I first joined the team it said 10, and we launched 3 months later. So we were not ready to scale to the point of the amount of, we didn't realize how much, it was trending on Twitter for 3 months, right? We did not realize how much hype there was going to be around it. I think it was kind of our fault, or some marketer's fault.
We're TechCrunch.
Yeah, we're TechCrunch. Yeah. No, it was beyond that though. So, yeah, we just were not ready to scale. So we actually, it was a shame because we basically spent the first 5 months scaling, and then by the time we actually scaled, we'd lost most of the users because they'd had a bad experience at first, because it was really it was in rough draft, right? If we didn't have to worry about scaling for those first 5 months, we could have actually iterated on the products.
Yeah.
And actually been able to address a lot of the glaring usability concerns, but we couldn't do that until 6 months after. So we had a ton of people come in the first thing, but then it's really hard after you get people in to get them to come back, right? And Wave had this goal of a particular number of users, and it became clear that we were never it would be really hard to reach that goal, because it would be so hard to get people to come back.
So it was released too early.
Yeah, it couldn't scale, and it didn't have a lot of features it needed. So actually, We used it internally, and internally it actually worked really well, primarily because the way groups worked actually worked a lot better, because it works really well for groups communication. And internally, all the group messages would go straight into your inbox, whereas externally, you had to search for them, which made like all the difference in the world. And so I think if we had actually, if it had worked externally the way it works internally, it might have actually been more successful from the get-go. But we didn't get that working until after we basically lost most people. So now, like, that's made me rather hesitant about releasing products early, because I'm afraid of the, losing them and not being able to get them to come back. I think there's kind of a balance to be struck there. Luckily, we get people to come back in Coursera because there's always new courses coming out, and they're coming for the content. So even if somebody visited us, a year ago, we might, they might have an excuse to come back a year from now when we have a new course, we have a new credentialing, or something like that. So it's not as worrisome in the Coursera space. But yeah, that burned a bit.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Sounds like a turning point.
Yeah, it turned down. Yeah, and I think we could have also, Wave could have gone enterprise really easily, but Google is not really, Google has Google Apps, but it's not their main thing. They're not super into it. It's just something they happen to do. So in terms of the amount of people that were on it, it wasn't worth it for them to go the enterprise route. And this was also, Google Wave was killed around the same time that Google Plus was coming out. And basically they're like looking at resources in the company and going like, all right, we need to put as many resources on Google Plus as possible. And they also wanted to reduce user confusion about what is the social experience of Google. And some people looked at Wave and thought it was quite social. I looked at it and thought it was about productivity. But some people looked at it and thought it was social. And so I think also what part of the motivation for killing it was let's consolidate, let's remove any notion that this might actually be the social component of Google, because they want Google Plus to be that. So yes. Yeah.
What are your favorite tools to learn what languages online?
I learn most of my languages by being in a code base for them. So I'm usually just in a code base, and then I have to Google how to use it. So I've never actually used any of the modern tools, but I know like the GDI students, they seem to like Linda is popular. A lot of people start in Codecademy. Treehouse seems to be popular as well. So those are like the tools for people learning from scratch. But I've never quite learned from scratch. Yeah.
Okay, so I asked the one question.
Okay.
So what are your favorite tools to learn human languages online?
Oh, human languages. Oh. I did play around with Duolingo for a bit, which is really cool. It's from Louis Van On, and I have like, nerd crush on Louis Van On, and I think everything he does is amazing. And I've even emailed with him a few times. So his Duolingo, I think, is really cool. I like what he's doing there. I didn't stick with it. I think that they need to work on the stickiness, which is also something I'm trying to work on at Coursera. Because the thing about language learning is it's something like you do it and you're into it, but then you forget about it because it's on the side, right? So I think, you just need more immersion. So I usually try and like, if I'm into something, I'll switch my entire browser language to that language. I'll switch my Google account to that language, so that I'm surrounded by it. And that's why when I make like my language things, I usually make them Chrome extensions, so that I have like a reminder of it all the time. Because I think with language learning, you need that omnipresence, right? Like if it's an email once a day, if it's a Chrome extension, that like my Chrome extension would remind you how many days it was since you last did it. So I'm hoping Duolingo will work more on that. And otherwise, I usually am just Googling etymologies and finding out how words are related to each other in other languages. Yeah.
What's your
Oh.
Go ahead. What's your favorite web technology at this moment? Like, I know there's so many ways, development,
Yeah, I mean, so we're working in 3 stacks right now at Coursera. We have PHP, we have Python Django, and we have Scala Play. Scala Play is like our new stack, so it's so new I haven't even been in it. So Django Python's okay. It's kind of too magical for me. It makes me accidentally do stuff to our database that I didn't mean to do. So I apologize if you were one of the 70,000 students I unenrolled that day. Always have backups. PHP is kind of disgusting. So sometimes you use things because you have to, because that's what you started with, right? Because when you're doing stuff, sometimes you do it for consistency with the rest of the code, right? But on the front end, so we're trying to have a more consistent front end. So on the front end, we're using Jade for our HTML templates, which is really cool because you don't have to worry about closing your tags properly. And I actually think, based on what I've seen, both from me and from HTML workshops, unclosed tags is a huge thing that happens all the time, and it can actually wreak havoc in your code. So Jade will just auto close everything for you, and it also has no brackets. So if you hate punctuation, it's nice. And we also use Stylus, which has no punctuation for our CSS, and then we use Backbone. And Backbone's not perfect, but it actually seems to work pretty well and in terms of helping us separate our presentation and our data and our structure. So I like our front-end stack. I've explored other front-end stacks, but I don't think any framework is perfect. I think what's more important is picking one that works pretty well for you and that won't be too hard to extend and modify, and just to have the entire team at a company, just to have the entire team decide that that's what you're going to do, and then you can build up this knowledge base of best practices and also a library of tools that you can use with that, right? So Backbone may not be the best JavaScript framework out there. Maybe Ember would be better. Maybe Angular would be better. However, we have so much in our code base that's using that now, and we have so much built up around it, and we know how to test it, that I think it's best just to stick with it, because it's being consistent. Yeah.
Yeah. Did your education in English and liberal arts, does it help you become a better programmer? I'm very curious about that because I hear that all the time. So a lot of people say that intersection helps you think better. I'm just curious about that going to take us.
I think the linguistics helped, but I don't know about the liberal arts. I mean, my liberal arts classes were neuroscience, so I just mostly learned about what drugs not to take. Yeah, but certainly it helps with writing, right? Because I think writing is really important. I'm a big fan of documentation. That's a lot of what I did at Google, was write documentation and fix their documentation and yell at other people to fix their documentation. And I think it's also important even when you're an engineer, right? You need to, I encourage everyone to anytime anyone says how to do something, I'm like, okay, make a wiki page, right? Because I always forget how to do stuff, and so I just want everyone to document how they do stuff. So I think writing is really helpful because it helps you share information internally and also share it externally, right? Because I feel we developers, we encounter things all the time and we come up with the solutions, but then we're not always very good at sharing them. And so if you get into a habit of sharing your solutions and writing them, then we probably have a lot more solutions documented on the web. And that's something I feel bad, because I've only been blogging once every few weeks lately, or even once a month. But ideally, I would blog once or twice a week, because I think even if you think something is silly just for you, you never know. There's probably somebody out there that's encountered that and would be really curious to read what you learned. So I think that writing is a really crucial thing for someone to be a good engineer. I don't necessarily know that my education helped with it, but I think reading lots of books helps with it. I find the more I read, the more I want to write. I think it gives you a craving when you read what other people are writing. Yeah.
I absolutely love your presentation and the sketches. So I had a question about the sketches actually. Do you sketch regularly or sketch about your daily life on a blog or something, or did you sketch specifically for the presentation?
Well, so actually, this was kind of a combination of Ignite talks that I've given in the past.
Okay.
So I had an Ignite talk called Growing Up Geek, and that was kind of my childhood. And then I had a Ignite talk at that conference about being a hermit hacker. So for that one, I did all the sketches. So I, when I'm doing stories about personal things that happened, I like to use either pictures or sketches.
Yeah.
So I'll just sit in a cafe with a whiteboard. So that's just a whiteboard, right? So you just whiteboard, markers, you draw it, you take a picture, draw it, take a picture. Pro tip, do not try and color in the skin of people. It will take you double the time if you try to color in the skin, and then they'll end up looking green because the black mixes with the yellow. because this was actually like my this is the second whiteboard presentation I had done. The first one I did, I tried to color in everything, and it was horrible. It took so long. So it's very fun. Like I like doodling, right? You know, we got to doodle a lot when we were kids because we had notebook paper. We don't get to doodle that much as adults because you can't like doodle on your laptop. So I usually just have my arm ready to doodle on. But if I have an excuse to doodle, like for a presentation, I will totally do it. Yeah, it's fun.
So if you can get, there is a balance of like women and engineers and programmers at startups or at companies like Google. Do you think that would change the way products are developed, or how or like what products are developed?
Yeah, it's a good question. I have noticed there's a few things that if I was a guy, maybe I would be making different decisions. Like I'm actually, one of the things I'm looking to now is gamification. And so we have lots of people who tell us about the amazing gamification stuff they've done, and they'll present it to us, and they're like, and it was like Star Wars themed, and then there's like explosions, and I'm sitting there going, okay, cool. I would not be used to that. So it's not just there's being a girl versus being a dude, and there's also just what you're into. So I also have this presentation about like being a Barbie girl in a computer world. And I'm not very Barbie, but I'm also not super geek. Like I've only recently gotten into like, you know, Joss Whedon and all the things you're supposed to be into as a geek, and I don't really play games and all that stuff. So there's a lot of stuff that I don't identify. So I think that diversity helps because it means like for the gamification stuff, like I take everything with a grain of salt, where I'm like, okay, I can see how some people would enjoy that, but let's find something that, you know, is proven to work with everyone, and something that will tap into what everybody likes, right? So I don't know if it's as much girl versus guy, and there was just an article that came out today about some study where there's psychological differences not being that different. But I think there is a diversity of like geek versus not geek, or like your interests, right? So I think ideally you get a diversity of everything. It's just people use girl versus guy as a general indicator of that diversity of opinions, but you could try and use other things as well. So like at Coursera, I'm hoping that we'll get more people that came from alternative education backgrounds. Right now we have a lot of Stanford students, but ideally we'd get some people that taught themselves online or learned in a very foreign university, and that would help like inform our opinion of how we do education, right? Because if you only have a bunch of Ivy League people doing it, you may not have the most balanced approach to stuff. Yeah.
What's the language your dad thinks now next?
So my dad now does what's called GRIZ computing or distributed computing, and which, you know, just means he uses a lot of like Amazon EC2 to set up clusters and distribute stuff across them, and he's using earthquake science as kind of the use case for this, because when you're predicting earthquakes, you want to get the data from all the different places and then be able to run it all together and figure out the prediction based on like all this worldwide stuff. So I don't know if he's particular about languages as much as he's particular about like stacks and the way you set up these grids. I remember when last time we had dinner, he was like, hey, how come Google, this is when I was working for Google, he's like, how come Google hasn't come up with an Amazon competitor? We need a Google option. So he was very opinionated on that. So I don't know about languages, but he seems to be pretty okay with what I'm doing now. We'll see. He just had a new kid, so we'll see how she turns out. So I have an older brother. I have an older brother and a younger brother. My older brother is like a starving artist in Miami, and my younger brother is a Drupal programmer in the city. And it's funny how different we turned out. And now there's like apparently I also have a stepbrother who's at Berkeley. I haven't met him, but I guess he's doing computer science, so that's another one doing computer science. And then I have this other one who's like 8 years old, I think. I haven't met her. She's a half sister, but she'll probably do computer science too. We'll see. But I determined based on like that, you really can't. Parenting is very unpredictable, and it's if you're a parent and you're trying to get your kid to program. I I don't think you have any guarantees. Because some people will be totally into what their parents do and want to do it, and then some people will take the opposite approach and rebel, right? But if you just have the opportunities available for them, right? If you surround them with computers and T1s, if they have that interest, then they'll have the ability to explore it.
At Coursera, you said you were thinking about gamification. Do you also, as an engineer, get to work on product strategy or maybe design something?
We get to work on product strategy. They kind of realize that we don't like being code monkeys, so they make sure that if there are any discussions going on about a future product, we're now involved like 3 months before any engineering starts, because you don't want to. It's shitty when someone's like, all right, new product, code it, right? Like, I do not react well to that at all. I think that's what I'm the most sensitive about, is the feeling of being a code monkey. Like, and I get like very kind of suspicious, and I'm like, wait, am I being a code monkey now? Am I a code monkey now? Because it is really easy to feel like that as an engineer, because you're getting like, bugs filed against you and people telling you to do stuff. But we are working really hard to actually make sure that we are all involved in like into whatever it is we're working on. But I think that's actually probably what I find the hardest part about being an engineer is the thought that you're not everything is of your own creation and thought. So that's probably what I struggle the most with, because I'm used to everything just getting to do it all, but you can't do that always, right? You have to work with people, and sometimes things just have to be made and things have to be fixed. So it's kind of this compromise you make. Hopefully, it works out in the end. Yeah.
So at Coursera, how are you learning from the activity that's going on there? So like both from the front end and how students are interacting with it, but then also how they are responding to the content and the classes themselves. Because I mean, there are tens or hundreds of thousands of people in classes.
Yeah. So we do have a data analytics team now, thankfully, which I was very happy about. And they are starting to do some interesting experiments. They're starting to do like A/B experiments to try and figure out. Our main thing that we're trying to figure out now is what makes for a successful student. So given some factors, what makes a student get through to the end of a course, right? So they did A/B experiments with like sending out weekly digest emails, and they would include different things in those digest emails to see what was it that would actually get them to get there, right? So would telling them about homework make them more likely to do something or less likely? Would telling them that 300 other people had already done the homework work? Would telling them about lectures do it? So they've got like 10 different sections they're varying in there. And then there's other things they're looking at, like, okay, if somebody participated in the forums, how likely is that a predictor of their eventual success? So they're running a lot of data to try and figure that out. They're also running data on our peer grading, because that's one of our big experiments, is can we have peers grade each other instead of having TAs, because TAs doesn't scale for like 200,000 students. So they're looking at the average grades that people give, and then they compare it and actually have TAs hand grade some things and see how well that works out, and see what number do we need to come up with, because we need to actually have reliable grades, right? So that's actually quite important. So that's the main stuff that the data analytics team is working on now. And we did just introduce Signature Track, which is this thing you pay for and it has a sign-up process. So they're also working quite a bit on looking at the sign-up flow for that and where we lose people. So kind of traditional sign-up stuff. And then besides that, we just look at the stats. Like today, I'm rewriting the forum right now. And we were trying to figure out what features we needed to actually have. So we're like, oh, okay, well, sorting by votes in an infinitely long thread is really hard. Do we actually need to do that? And then we looked at the stats and realized we did, because a lot of people were actually clicking it. So we try and do stuff like that as well, right? Because we have a lot of features. We've only been around for a year, but whoever hacked on it in those first 6 months managed to put like every freaking feature in there. Because I think that the problem was that, so it was built by Stanford research students, and they wanted to please their research professor, and so the research professor was also the one teaching the class, and they'd be like, hey, can you do this? And they're like, yeah, of course. So we've got like thousands of features in our code, but ideally now that we've had them there, we can look at them and see which of them do we actually need and which of them can we simplify. Because obviously you can always support infinite features in your product, but it's a maintenance burden every time you do, so we don't want to. So that's part of what we're doing now, is figuring out how we can simplify and what we need to build instead.
You've talked about how you like working with people, but you've also done a lot of independent stuff.
Yeah.
So when you have worked on your own projects, how have you motivated yourself to finish when you're the only one working on it?
I think I just imagine my dad. Yeah, I'm pretty good at being self-driven. I think the hard part comes when you're banging against a wall and you don't know what to do, and that's when it's easy to get distracted by something else, like Glee. Sometimes I've done things which, like contests. I did a lot of contests, and contests have deadlines. But generally, I'd say that I'm just self-driven to do those things. I don't really set too many deadlines. Maybe I should. Yeah. Because I think is I'm really bad at not doing anything. So like if I have a weekend where I accomplish nothing, I feel really bad. And I've always been very bad at having long weekends and stuff like that because I have this like sneaking suspicion that I really should have gotten some work done. So I think it's just guilt, right? I don't think this is necessarily like the healthy response. But I think it's just the notion like, wow, like I just spent a day and I didn't accomplish anything. So I guess at the end of each day I think about what I accomplished. I know I should probably learn to relax more. So I don't think you should take my advice here.
You write yourself an app.
Yeah. The relax tracker.
Yes, that's
Have you
right.
relaxed
Time to
yet?
relax.
Yeah. Yeah, every once in a while I realize that it's actually more important to hang out with people. Kind of go in phases. Like hermit phase, people phase, that stuff. Cool? All right. Good.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.